Hey, welcome to this week's edition of our Indie Books International podcast, Marketing with a Book, where every week we have an opportunity to interview one of our authors or one of our guest experts. And I'm thrilled to host this week's episode because we have an amazing Hall of Fame speaker and certified speaking professional, Bill Stainton, out of Seattle. A friend of mine of many years, I actually admit that, and I think that you will enjoy his sharing today and the follow-on questions and answers. But before we get into that, we always do a bit of an author roll call, and I'm going to start with David Goldman. David, would you just tell us, I guess I just already gave away your name, but if you just reemphasize your name and where you're from and what your current book is or your next book is.
Thank you, Mark. I'm David Goldman. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I wrote the book, The Road to Happiness, How to Get What You Really Want. And I'm working on a new book called Bringing in the Business.
Nice. Thank you, David. Craig.
Put me on mute. My name is Craig Lawler. I'm in Chicago, Illinois, where it's 106 degrees this afternoon. I'm the author of Smooth Selling Forever. I put my clients on a course to predictable and sustainable sales results. And I'm talking with Henry later this week about my next book, The Star Guide to Smooth Selling Forever.
Oh, nice. Thank you, Craig. Good to see you.
Nice
Chris, if you will unmute yourself and take the talking stick.
Hello, everybody. Does the microphone work? I think I just changed hardware. My name is Chris Hodges. I'm talking to you from Denver, Colorado. I'm the author of Noble Automation Now, How to Innovate, Motivate, and Transform Your Business with Intelligent Automation.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And Henry.
Well, hi, I'm Henry DeVries, author of Marketing with a Book, and proud to be co-owner of Indie Books with Mark. So welcome, everybody. And I'm in Oceanside, California. The name says it all.
Thank you, Henry. What a novel concept. Book and podcast title, the same. And for those of you listening, I want to just put a little pin light on. It's marketing with a book, not marketing your book. There actually is a great book by, I believe it's John Kramer, 1001 Ways to Market Your Book. It is so thick that it could be used as a weapon. But for our purposes, we talk about marketing with a book because at Indie Books International, we believe that your book should be a gateway tool to more of the type of business you want. Yes, we believe in marketing your book for sure, but it's less about the book and more about $5,000 coaching assignments or $10,000 keynote speeches. What specifically do you want your book to lead to? And that's an important part of our philosophy and brand at Indie Books International. We also have a guest here today, and I'm going to call on her and see if she's ready to reveal herself. Thule Garner, my friend and Bill's friend from Seattle too. Are you nearby and can share your book project?
I have an unpublished book called Update Your Geek Career. My business has shifted a little bit, so it's still on the shelf, but I'm mostly here to support Bill.
Who cares about Bill? It's just good to see you. And in fact, maybe we should just interview you today instead of Bill, and Bill could support you.
Maybe next time.
Okay, maybe next time. Good to see you, Thule.
Likewise.
Well, it is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce my friend Bill Stainton. He is a CSP, Certified Speaking Professional designation given or bestowed by the National Speakers Association. He also is a CPAE, which essentially means he's in our Hall of Fame. He's one of the best of the best. And let me just tell you a little bit about Bill. Bill Stainton is a 29 Emmy Award winner and Hall of Fame keynote speaker. His primary topics are innovation, creativity, and breakthrough thinking. Bill helps forward-thinking leaders and their teams turn creativity into money through his keynotes, workshops, coaching, and leadership retreats. And as a mentor to speakers at all levels, from beginners to fellow Hall of Famers, Bill helps them structure their message to make it unforgettable. And on a personal note, and I hope he might shed some insight into this, on a personal note, there's maybe no one in the world who knows more about the Beatles than Bill Stainton. Bill, good to have you with us. I'm going to let you take it away, and after your presentation, we'll do a little Q&A.
That sounds good. Thanks, Mark. Boy, you sure know how to raise the bar, which frankly I don't like. I like a nice low bar that's easy to step over, but you have raised the bar. Before we just start idly chatting, I want to talk about something that I get asked a lot because, as you said, Mark, I'm primarily a keynote speaker. And so often at the National Speakers Association, at other events, people come up to me and say, Bill, how can I become a keynoter too? And I know that for a lot of authors, indie book authors, for example, that's a goal as well. Everybody wants to be the keynoter. So how do you do that? Because see, people get it wrong a lot. So what I want to talk about is something that I call how to turn great content into a great keynote. Because everybody here has great content. I mean, if you're part of the Indie Books family, you've got great content already. That doesn't mean you necessarily have a great keynote. You have the building blocks of a great keynote. So let's start talking about this a little bit. First of all, why the keynote slot? Why does everybody want to be the keynote slot? Okay, let me restart that little slide. For those of you just listening to this, don't worry about the slides. Let me try it again. I promise you it was working before this. There we go. Why keynote? Why do people want to be the keynoter? Well, there are a few reasons here. First of all, there's the glamour. I mean, the keynote slot is glamorous. People like that. There's the prestige that comes with being the keynoter. There's the influence. The keynoter has more influence. You're speaking to everybody there, so you get more influence. Rock star status. I mean, the keynoter is the rock star. Not just the rock star. The keynoter is the lead singer, not just the drummer or the bass player. And by the way, I play both drums and bass, so don't bother writing me letters. The keynote, that's the lead singer. That's the real rock star. And then, of course, there is the money. The keynote slot tends to get money. Mark talked about, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 speaking fees for a keynote. That's doable. Now, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be keynoting for a fee. You can also keynote to promote your book. You can also keynote to promote your coaching, your consulting, your mentoring, but still, that all leads to money. And so the keynote tends to be kind of the money slot. Okay, so why does the keynoter have the glamour, the prestige, the influence, the rock star status? Why does the keynoter get all the money? It's because of this. Because there's more pressure on the keynoter. There's a lot of pressure on the keynoter. As my friend and fellow keynoter Kelly Swanson once said, she said, a keynote has a higher audience expectation than the workshop held on the 4th floor after lunch. The breakout session, whatever. When you're the keynoter, there's more expected of you. There's more expected from the meeting planner. There's more expected from the audience. So here's the big mistake that I see a lot of content people make, whether you're an author, a coach, a consultant, a trainer, And I think I'll just group them all into the word trainer for now, just to make it easy, but it encapsulates all those other forms of content that you may have. The big mistake I see trainers making is they think, okay, well, I've got a 3-hour training program, or I've got a 160-page book, or I've got this great 90-day consulting program, and I've been hired to do a keynote. So I'll just do an hour's worth, or I'll condense it all into an hour, and that'll be my keynote. And that's the mistake everybody makes, because you don't understand exactly what a keynote is. Here's the key that you need to know. A keynote is not just a shorter training. A keynote is a different animal. It's not just a shorter training. Here's the distinction. Training is about how. A keynote is about why. Now, what do I mean by that? At the end of a training, you want the audience to be saying, I know how to do something now that I didn't know how to do 3 hours ago, 3 days ago, 3 months ago. I now have a skill that I didn't have before. That's the goal of a training, or possibly a book, or coaching, or consulting. I know how to do something now. At the end of a keynote, you want your people saying, hang on a second, let me just get out of this. I'll go back here so you can watch me fumble with this. Okay, you know what? There, that just, my other computer froze, so I'm just going to go on. At the end of a training, you want people saying, I know how to do something I didn't know how to do before. At the end of a keynote, you want people saying, holy crap, this is important. I had no idea. This is costing us money now. This is, I need to do something about this now. Or to put it another way, my eyes have been opened and I see the light. Does that make sense? Yes, you want to give a few takeaways. You want to give a few things that they can talk about, but or a few skills that they can take home, but that's not the ultimate goal of a keynote. The keynote's goal really is about making them aware of a problem of which they were previously unaware. And this is where it's great for trainers and authors and consultants and coaches, because you make them aware of a problem and they go, oh, wow, this is a bigger problem than I thought it was. And then after your keynote, they're going to come up to you and say, I had no idea this was that important. Can you help me with that? Why, yes, I can. In fact, I wrote a book about it. I've got a coaching program about it. I consult about that. Whereas if you give them all the how-to in the keynote, there's no reason for them to come up to you afterwards and go, excuse me, can you help me any further? Does that make sense? So there are a few things. I'm going to refer to my notes since oh wait, the slides might be working now. This will be cool. This will be cool. There we go. End of training. See, now Mark is regretting saying that Bill is one of the best. So, okay, let's talk about the differences, some of the differences between a training and a keynote. As we've already talked about, a training is about how, a keynote is about why. A training tends to be long form, a few hours to a few months to whatever. A keynote is short form. We're talking like 45 minutes to an hour. In fact, more and more recently, I've been getting booked for like, 30 to 40-minute keynotes. You still get a 60-minute keynote every now and then. Every now and then you get a 90-minute keynote, which is, to me, too much. But still, keynotes tend to be short form. In fact, Mark LeBlanc delivered the shortest and most memorable keynote in National Speakers Association history. His entire keynote was 2 words long. Maybe he'll tell us about that. A training that focuses on techniques, again, the how-to. Keynote that focuses on stories. Stories are vital to a keynote. Henry's got some great techniques about stories. Another member of the Indie Books family, Michael Haig, is the best in the world at stories. So if you need to develop your storytelling craft, you are in the absolute right place. Training is all about skill transfer. Keynote is about emotional transfer. Training, they do the work. You're teaching them something and having them do it. Keynote, you're doing the work. I mean, yeah, it's a dialogue. It's about them and everything, but the spotlight's on you. You're the one up there doing the sweat. With the training, the audience expects to be educated. With a keynote, the audience expects to be entertained and or motivated. So you can see why just making, saying, well, I'll just do an hour training, it's not going to cover these bases, right? Makes sense? A training tends to be head-oriented. Again, here's the how. Keynote is about heart-oriented. Again, the emotional transfer. And finally, with training, it's a classroom. With a keynote, it's a show. It's a show. The audience is expecting a show. So how do you do that? Okay, how do you do that? How do you turn your content into a keynote? Because you can do it. So here are the steps that you need to go through. First off, you need to ask yourself, what's the big deal? What do I mean by that? The key question, why is what you talk about important? Because again, that's the whole point you're trying to get across in your keynote, why this is important. What can you say in your keynote that will make them think, this is more important than I realized, we need to deal with this now? Do some work and think about that, and here's what I would suggest. See, most of us get really close to our content and our topic, and we think, well, yes, it is the most important thing in the world. But can you convince somebody else it's the most important thing in the world? Here's what I would suggest you do at some point. Get together with a buddy. It could be one of the Indie Books buddies, somebody else on this podcast, somebody else on the call, somebody else that, it doesn't matter, but just somebody. And your job is to, in as few words as possible, explain to them why what you talk about is vitally important. Their job is to be brutally but diplomatically honest with you. So if you're the recipient and one of your pals says, hey, let me run this by you, here's why I think what I do is important, and it's not really clicking for you, you've got to tell them. Because it doesn't do that. Look, we all tend to be nice and go, oh yeah, that's really good. And meanwhile, we vomit a little bit inside, right? You know? But that doesn't help them at all. Because now you're sending them out into the world to deliver a message that nobody cares about. Because here's the thing, nobody cares about your message unless you make them care. So if you give your why, your what's the big deal to a friend and they say, I'm not seeing it, that's on you. You've got to keep working it. Why is this important? Because wouldn't you rather find out that your why is not compelling in front of a friend than in front of 300 people sitting there with their arms crossed wondering why they're listening to you? So make sure you're able to do that. Okay, the next thing you do, once you do that, is a step that I call yes ma'am. Now what does that mean? What's the MAM there? The MAM is what I call your month after message. Because here's the thing, after you're done speaking, nobody's going to remember what you talk about. The evidence shows that an hour after you're done speaking, they've already forgotten at least 50% of what you talk about. A month after, they're probably not going to remember anything. The key question here is, what is your month after message? What's the one thing that you want them to remember? What's the one single, simple thing that you want them to remember 1 month after your keynote? Because here's the thing, at best, they'll only remember one thing. And my question to you is, do you want them to choose that thing, or do you want to choose that thing? My assertion is it should be up to you. You're the keynoter. You're the one who should figure out what's my most important message. What is the most important thing that they can remember? And it can almost not be too simple. So this should not be your 18 steps toward happiness using the convenient acronym pharmaceuticals. The P stands for, they're not going to remember that. It's not going to happen. Even your 5 steps, they're not going to remember it. Mark, you and I were talking earlier, and you know about this. The second most memorable keynote probably ever given on the NSA stage was a few years before your convention in 2008 by a friend of ours named Joe Calloway. So, Mark, we did not plan this out. Do you remember what the month after message of his famous speech was?
Yes, I do, Bill. This message was let it go.
Exactly. Let it go. How simple is that? 3 words. One more than Mark needed, but still 3 words. Let it go. And people to this day still talk about that keynote. It happened, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Not 20, but a long time ago. We're talking about a month after message. People still remember let it go. Now, if you say, well, what else was in the keynote? They probably couldn't tell you anything because it was all about that one single message. Let it go. Clear up your life. Things like, all that kind of thing. So try and crystallize your message to that. Again, the one single, simple thing that you can do. One of my friends and colleagues, Randy Gage, says this. He says, a keynote is one note. One note. One overriding message looked at in several ways. So those several ways now take us into the meat of your keynote, which is the structure, your keynote structure. And that's the third thing you need to focus on, your keynote structure. Key question here, what are your 3 main points? Now, does it have to be 3? Could it be 2? Could it be 4? Could it be 5? Yeah, it could, but 3 works. In Western culture, we're kind of hardwired to remember things in 3s, to categorize things in 3s. So if you use this structure, this will work for you. What are your 3 main points? How can you look at your month after message through 3 different points of view? I'll give you some examples just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about. You can use a sequential structure. This is where we were. This is where we are now. This is where we can be or will be in the future. Point 1, point 2, point 3. Make sense? Following so far? You can do problem solution. Here's the problem. That's your first point. Second point, here's what it's costing us. Here's what the cost is. Third point, here's the solution. Okay, it's a nice three-act structure to a keynote. Complex to simple. Here's the problem. Here's one way, the complex way that we could solve it. Or, point 3, here's a better way, the simple way that we should solve it. One more example, homing in. Here's how it affects the industry. Here's how it affects the company. Here's how it affects you. So those are just some ways to do it. So when you think of your keynote structure, here are kind of the steps to a keynote. If you're visually oriented, think of it like one of those small Tootsie Rolls turned on its side. The first part of the keynote is your open. And I like to open with a story. You could also open with a question, a compelling fact, something that's going to knock their shoes off or surprise them. But you're open, and then you go into point 1, and then you go into point 2, and then you go into point 3, and then you go into your close. Now, we'll talk about timing for these in just a second. But when you think about point 1, point 2, and point 3, here's something else I want you to think about. What anchor can you use to anchor that point, to anchor point 1, to anchor point 2, to anchor point 3? What do I mean by anchor? I mean, what is the piece, the memorable piece that you're going to build into that point that the audience is going to go, ooh, that's cool. Maybe it's a great story, like a really fabulous story to exemplify point 1. Frankly, they can all 3 be stories if you're really great at storytelling. You can have a great killer story for point 1, a great killer story for point 2, a great killer story for point 3. Maybe one of them is an audience activity. You bring members of the audience up on stage and you do something which demonstrates that point. Maybe if you're like my friend Dan Thurman, who's a juggler and acrobat, you do an insanely complicated juggling routine that somehow exemplifies that point. But what is something that you can bring in? If you're Janice Stanfield, another friend of mine who's got a gorgeous voice, a great songwriter, maybe it's a great song if you can sing. And by the way, when I say if you can sing, I mean if other people have told you that you can sing. We've all seen that mistake happen, right? But just figure, okay, I know what my month after message is. Here are the 3 points I want to make around that and supporting that month after message. And here's my anchor for point 1. Here's my anchor for point 2. Here's my anchor for point 3. So going back to the month after message, when do you bring that in? Well, first of all, let's talk about the timing. The open, and I'm going to give you sample timings, and this is for a 60-minute keynote. But the ratios stay the same. And again, this isn't carved in stone, but this is a good model that will work for you. Your open will be about 10 minutes. Each of your 3 points will be about 15 minutes. 15 minutes for point 1, 15 minutes for point 2, 15 minutes for point 3. This makes it a lot easier to write a speech. Because you don't think, oh man, I've got to write a 60-minute speech. You think, no, here's point 2. I need 15 minutes. Okay, I got this story. That's going to take up 6 minutes or whatever. And then your close is roughly 5 minutes. And we talk about the month after message, the Let It Go from Joe Calloway. you want to reiterate that throughout the speech, because that's what makes it memorable. That's why people will go away remembering it. And a great places to put that in is right when you go from the open into point one during that transition, insert your month after message. And right when you go from point three and you're about to wrap it up and go into the close, that's another great place for the month after message. Also, at the end of the other 2 points, at the end of point one, at the end of point two. And ideally, you'll say it with the exact same languaging, because that's what people will remember if you use the exact same languaging. That's your keynote structure. That's your basic keynote structure. And again, it's all about why is this important, and what's the one simple month after message that you want to wrap this whole keynote around. Last thing I'll leave you with before we start the open chat is this, and this is important. And I didn't really get this at first, and I'm still learning it more and more. It's this: keynoting is a responsibility. It's a responsibility. When they give us a microphone, they're also giving us their trust. When a meeting planner trusts you with a microphone, they're also entrusting you with their audience and with their reputation. That's a high calling, and that's a high responsibility. But if you meet that, if you figure out how to do a keynote, not just a short training, but a keynote that the audience talks about and remembers and is excited about and feels compelled to take some sort of action, which could be hiring you, that's when you will get to the point where you too can have the glamour, the prestige, the influence, the rock star status, and yes, the money. That's it.
All right, Bill.
Questions,
Thank
comments,
you. Everybody
critique.
give it up for everybody. Give it up for Bill for this part of our interview. And thank you so much, Bill, for joining us and sharing your wisdom, your insights, a strategy or two, your ideas on how to be a better keynoter. I've got a couple of questions for you. And prior to that,
this is the part I'm dreading.
I want to circle back to something that you referred to so that our listeners are not left in the dark. It is true that in 2007, 2008, I served as president of the National Speakers Association that year, my term of service. And we were in New York City at the Marriott Marquis. And
Bill, to this date, the most highly attended National Speakers Association convention in history. And
certainly our favorite of all time. But instead of the typical or the obligatory, the president walks out on stage and says, "Hey, thank you everyone for joining us for this convention. You've come from far and wide, and it's going to be a great experience," and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
As most mere mortal presidents do. I was anything but a mere mortal president. And our theme that year was NSA Rocks. And we had legitimate A-list rock stars on our stage in New York City. And instead of coming out with the typical welcome, I came out to the music from Risky Business and the Tom Cruise scene, where I slid out, and the audience, over 2,000 people, went crazy. Didn't really know it was me. Hardly anybody had ever seen me without a tie on, let alone without pants and in socks.
You committed to the bit.
I committed to the bit.
Really committed to the bit.
I slid out, turned around and said, "NSA Rocks." It was the shortest speech, 2 words, in the history of the National Speakers Association. I doubt there will ever be a shorter one than that. And
I doubt it. But it also got the best response of any presidential speech in history. And Thule, I'm so sorry. Yeah, wait. I'm conflicting, or I'm conflating our local chapter speeches, because Thule and I have both been presidents of our local chapter. And so I was thinking presidential speeches and but on the national level, Marks, there's, you were a rock star. You were absolutely the rock star. You were the rock star.
Well, thank you, Bill. And your point that the keynoter, the keynote, you have a responsibility, and you had a responsibility for that convention because you were my selection and my team's selection to be our opening keynote speaker.
Right.
And you served it up masterfully. And I don't know if you remember this, but I do. It was Saturday, August 2nd. At approximately 7:17 Eastern Standard Time, Marriott Marquis Ballroom, Times Square, when you delivered a keynote for the ages. And I remember you and I did not talk about this in preparation for this interview, but your month after message, which is now 13 years after message, your singular message of that presentation was Shake It Up.
It was Shake It Up. Yep.
And could you just, if you could go back to your preparation for that speech, what were you thinking about? What were you planning? You also came out on stage in a very creative way, and I'd like you to share a little bit about that iconic keynote speech.
Sure. Well, talk about high bars. I mean, this is the National Speakers Association. These are our colleagues and peers. And at that time, I think I was somewhat known, but certainly not as much as I've been now, because it's been, a few more years. So, you really want to do a good job. Look, you always want to do a good job, but here especially. And Mark gave me a huge gift with his theme of NSA Rocks. And as Mark said earlier, I'm a Beatles guy. I know a lot about them. I've been a musician all my life. So I kind of focused on that, Shake It Up. And the Beatles certainly shook it up. And one of their most famous songs, which oddly enough they did not write, but the chorus is Shake It Up, baby. It's twist and shout. So what I decided to do was we actually hired a Beatles tribute band, one of the top Beatles tribute bands in the country. And so here's how the keynote opened. I think it was Eric Chester who was the chair of the convention. Mark was the president. Eric was his chair for the convention. Eric came in and said something about, and NSA Rocks, and certainly there have been some amazing moments in rock and roll history, but possibly none more memorable than this. And he tosses to the video of Ed Sullivan saying, yesterday and today, well, ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles, and the curtain is down. And all of a sudden the audience hears down, 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 the opening chords of I Want to Hold Your Hand being played live. And the audience goes crazy, and the curtains open, and there are the Beatles. It's this Beatles tribute band dressed like the Beatles playing I Want to Hold Your Hand. And the band, finishes I Want to Hold Your Hand, and the audience standing ovations, just like, wow, that was fantastic. At that point, the drummer, the Ringo of the band, stands up, walks away from the drum set, walks to the center stage, pulls off his wig and his shirt, because it's a breakaway shirt, so there's just a t-shirt underneath. He was wearing, black, the Ed Sullivan look shirt, and it's me. And I start my speech. So I was the drummer for that Beatles band. And then I brought it back home at the end by, again, keep reiterating, shake it up, shake it up, shake it up. So anybody who knows anything about the Beatles, they're like, wish we could hear that song. So at the end, as I'm saying my last lines, I'm walking back to the drum set. And I forget exactly what I said, but something about, just remember, you got to shake it up, 2, 3, 4. And then we did Twist and Shout. And that was the end. So yeah, it was really cool.
It was more than cool, Bill. It was iconic. And you were the mastermind behind that. And the biggest frustration or negative comments we got from that experience was
It was terrible. Why did you pick him?
The tribute band wanted to play more. They
Right.
wanted to put on a concert.
They did.
And almost 2,100 people were going crazy, including my mother dancing in the front row to the "I Want to Hold Your Hand." But it was just one of the greatest evenings of my career. And thank you for accepting that challenge and that responsibility, because you knocked it out of the park.
Oh, thanks. There were so many times between saying yes and that actual night that I hated you and hated you for even suggesting me. Because again, it's a lot of effort. I do remember the thing being I was most nervous about. One, because rehearsal time is very tight at NSA conventions. There are a lot of moving parts. I was allowed to rehearse one song with the band one time. So the question is, do I want to rehearse the opening song or the closing song? So I rehearsed "I Want to Hold Your Hand" with them one time. Twist and Shout, when I played it in front of those 2,100 people, that was the first time I'd ever played it with that band. I'd never met the band before. So that was the first time we ever played it. The thing I was most worried about, though, was the breakaway shirt. I had one of those Countryman mics, and it's all wired inside. I was afraid when I ripped the shirt off, I was also going to, hurl the microphone off the side of the stage. But fortunately, that didn't happen.
Wow.
It's so weird. I mean, any of you who have spoken, and probably most of you here have spoken in front of an audience at some point, isn't it amazing that you're giving it all for the audience, but there's this voice in the back of your head, this kind of monitoring you, saying, "Oh, okay, this doesn't seem to be resonating. Ooh, they like that. They like that part, and oh, you're getting to the difficult part now. Hope you remember those words. Like, okay, now you've got to say the president of the association's name. Do you remember? Is it Frank? Is it Phil? What's the name? Is it Phyllis? So yeah, it is amazing when you're all the things that are going on.
Your point is well taken when you talk about trainers and consultants and coaches who have this dream to be a keynote speaker, and they think that a keynote speech is just a short training or it's a group coaching session, and they all dream about wanting to be in that spotlight. What would you say to that trainer consultant type? Because I hear it all the time.
Yeah, I'll bet you do.
Mark, you just put me on stage, I'm going to be fine.
Right.
What do you say to that person to kind of to interrupt their thinking, to help them understand that, to your phrase earlier, the keynote is a different animal in the zoo?
It is a different animal in the zoo. And again, remember, you've got that responsibility. Here's the dilemma that we face as keynoters and as good keynoters. And Mark, you're also one of the best. I mean, people think of you as a trainer and a coach and a consultant, and you are all those things. You're also a world-class keynoter. The problem is, when you're a world-class keynoter, just like if you're a world-class musician, you make it look easy. And like if you're if you're a concert pianist, very few people are going to look and go, "Oh, I can do that," because we know that that's a difficult skill. But a keynoter, we're just up there, we're telling stories. It looks like we're having a blast. We are, but that's because we've really worked at it. We make it look easy. There's a craft to it. You're taking the audience on a journey. Okay, they're laughing here, but now we're going to bring them down into the depths. But I've got to release them from the depths, so I better build a laugh in there. And what do you do if something does go wrong? What do you do? I mean, all these things that we know. Plus, how do you get the speech in the first place? How do you market? A lot of people say, look, the job is not doing the speech. The job is getting the speech. This is a tough business. It's not an easy business. I mean, even without a global pandemic that shuts down the entire industry for a year and a half, now going into 2 years, perhaps. This is not an easy job. We make it look easy because that's our job. And people look and go like, well, yeah, I can speak. I can put words together. There's a lot more to it than that. It's just like when you go to a comedy club and you see a comedian who makes it look easy, like a Jerry Seinfeld or somebody like that, and you think, well, I can do that. So you sign up for an open mic. And you get up there and you do your 3 minutes and nobody laughs. And you go, but my friends all think I'm funny. That's a whole different thing. It's really easy to be funny with your friends when you're all having a couple of beers on the back deck. It's a lot tougher when you've got a bunch of people sitting in an audience who are demanding it and expecting it. And in the case of a keynote, if it's a corporate job, they might not even want to be there necessarily. If it's a convention, if it's an association convention, yeah, they probably do want to be there. But if it's the annual corporate meeting, they might be anywhere from indifferent to hostile. Okay, well, welcome to the big time, folks.
Yeah. I was one of those for the better part of 2 decades that thought I could just do a short, content-rich session. And it was you, it was Tim Gard, it was Haley Foster, it was Eleni Kalakos, who just in the last 5, 6, 7 years have really turned me around in working on the keynote. And my single focus message is you can always take one more step.
Beautiful.
Based on one of the stories from the Camino.
And do you see everybody else listening to you? Do you hear how simple that is? I mean, Mark's got these amazing stories. He's done the Camino like 15 times. It's a 500-mile walk. And Mark just keeps doing it because he was dropped on his head as an infant. But still, and he's written a great book about it and everything. But so he's got all these experiences and he creates these rich stories and all that. But it all comes down to one thing, the 1 month after message. You can always take one more step. So a month from now, or 2 months from now, or a year from now, when people are going through a tough time in their life, they're not going to remember anything else Mark says, except they might remember, oh, that guy, don't remember his name. Yeah, you know what? He said, you can always take one more step. That's sticky. Yeah. That's going to work. So when you're thinking about your month after message, think about the simplicity of that. That's what you're shooting for. That's a perfect one. And
it took me a long time to understand that was the message.
Yeah.
So sometimes
we get so close to it. We get so close to it. And here's the cool thing. When you finally come up with it, it seems so obvious. And that, again, is why it looks easy. Why somebody else will look at, well, you can always take one more step. Yeah, come on, duh, that's obvious. But to come up with that, there's a phrase that says, simplicity on this side, simplicity on the front side of complexity is worthless. Simplicity on the back side of complexity is priceless. So Mark, you take them through. It's like if you came out and just said, you can always take one more step. Thank you very much. People go like, well, that wasn't worth the money. But you take them on this amazing journey filled with hardship, and not just about the Camino. I'm sure you're taking through all kinds of pain points and things that have happened in your world, and then transferring it to their world, which is another skill set of a good keynoter, to do what Max Dixon calls the transferable metaphor. So they go, oh, this is about me too. So you take them through all that journey and then remind them again at the very end. You've sprinkled it throughout, but remind them again, you can always take one more step. Now it's profound. I mean, the golden rule is pretty darn easy. Do unto others as you would have do unto yourself, or whatever it is. It's pretty easy, but in the right context, man, is it profound. The best messages, let it go, shake it up. You can always take one more step. Those are profound as long as you take the audience through that journey first.
Bill, would you, I know my answer to this question, but I want to ask you, do you think that's where somebody should start, is what is that single message, and then make that the bullseye and build your 3 points, or make it the hub of a wheel with many spokes, or however you're going to drive that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish I had learned that earlier. Once you figure out what that is, and again, it all comes back to you. Why is this important? And all that. And then, if let's say you're going to write your speech on your computer, write that month after message. Once you have it figured out, or even if you think, okay, I think it's going to be this. Maybe it's not quite. Maybe I'll reword it because it might change as you work on the speech. I go, oh, you know what, it really is. But put that on a Post-it and stick it up on your computer. So it's always there, because everything has to flow from that. The entire speech, the entire keynote, whether it's 10 minutes for like a TED Talk or an hour or whatever, it should seem organic. It should seem like this is all of one piece. Remember what Randy Gage said, a keynote is one note. It's not a bunch of, oh, and here's a story, oh, and here's a story, it's all got to come together and tie together so the audience may not know where you're going to be taking them, but they have to feel like, oh, there's a roadmap and he or she knows what it is.
Mhm.
And they're taking me on a great journey. Now, in the right circumstances, depending on the audience, depending how large it is, can you see them, you know, how formal or informal it is, yeah, you may take a detour here or there. But you can do that because you know what the destination is. That's what your month after message is. That's what you can always take one more step is, you know, that's the destination. So the roadmap, if you know that destination, you can look at the map and go, oh, you know what, there are a lot of different ways I can get there. And that's the fun of crafting a keynote. There are a lot of ways I can get there, but this is where I'm going. This is where I want to take the audience. When we're done, when we're through with this thing, this is where we all are. We're all going to end up in the same place, and there's not going to be any mistake. There's not going to be somebody thinking they're in Pittsburgh and somebody else thinking, no, I'm pretty sure this is Harrisburg. No, we all know it's Pittsburgh. See what I did there? Call back. Pittsburgh. There we go. Pittsburgh. Or Chris. Pittsburgh there. So it's yeah, it all comes down to that. Because the audience has to feel like you know what you're doing and you know where you're taking them.
Bill, I want to interrupt this interview just to share your website. We want to put it in the chat box. Your website, I believe, is billstainton.com.
It is, oddly enough.
And we always put someone on the spot and ask them for a free gift. What do you have for us today, Bill Stainton?
Yeah, really. And I was a little offended when you asked my free gift to be ice cream for everybody. Logistically, it's too difficult, so I'm not doing that. But I do have, so my primary topic, as you talked about in the introduction, is innovation, creativity, and breakthrough thinking. Innovation, coming up with innovative ideas, is a life skill. I call it the master key skill. If you can be innovative, then that sets you apart from everybody else. And certainly as authors, you want to set yourself apart, as thinkers, as thought leaders, as you want to be able to set yourself apart. So how do you develop those innovative skills? What do you do when you need an idea and you need an idea fast? Maybe there's a challenge or maybe there's an opportunity and you want an idea fast. Well, I've got a cheat sheet. I've developed a cheat sheet. I call it Turning Creativity into Money, because that's my definition of innovation. And the cheat sheet, you can get it by going to billstainton.com/ billstainton.com/indie books. Indie books, which, you should be able to remember that, because, this is indie books. So there it is. Oh, okay, and it looks like it came up, chest sheet. That's good, Suzanne. Yeah, okay, well, what Suzanne put into the chat of TCIM's -cheat works also, but if you just go billstainton.com/indie books, it'll take you to the exact same place. Either one works. Again, multiple ways to get to the same destination. You see how this all comes full circle?
Yeah. Bill, I also want to put a little pin light or a little laser. You did an amazing TEDx talk a few years ago. We want to put that link from YouTube into the chat box as well. I encourage everyone who's watching this interview or anyone who's listening to this interview after today to make sure that they go to YouTube or Google Bill Stainton and TEDx talk and watch the master in action. And I cannot impress upon you enough that sometimes we as keynote speakers or those who aspire to be keynote speakers are so close that we cannot see the key message or the keynote in our body of expertise and our experiences. And so it's critical that you raise your hand and reach out for help to Bill or somebody like Bill, but no one accomplishes anything great alone. And Bill, do you have one parting tip, one more that you might share with our listeners and viewers today?
Nope, that's it.
That's it?
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can come up with something. A parting tip for aspiring keynoters. Yeah, this might not be sexy, but it's all about the structure. It all comes down to the structure. because the structure is what gives your audience security that this is going to be a decent keynote. And again, keep in mind, it's a show. I mean, a lot of keynoters, especially like high content keynoters, they don't get that it's a show. But anybody listening to this, you know it's true. Because anytime you've been at any kind of get together where there's been a keynote speaker, you know what happens. We all do it. You walk into the ballroom or the auditorium or the classroom or whatever it is, and you sit back and you wait for the show. And all you're hoping is, I hope it's going to be a good show. Hope the show doesn't suck. So it is a show. And the key ingredient to make sure the show is a good show is work on your storytelling. Stories are the building blocks of a great keynote. Mark's keynote is full of amazing stories, memorable stories, unforgettable stories. A great keynote is built on stories. And again, indie books, you were in a great place. I think, Mark, didn't you and Henry and somebody wrote a book that talks all about stories, and of course you got Michael Haig also. But I mean, and Henry, I know you've done a lot of work into this about like the 8 basic stories, and everything's kind of an offshoot of those. I mean, you guys have really done the heavy lifting on this. So anybody who's a part of the indie books community, again, you're in the right place. Now all you have to do is figure out, okay, what's my month after message? What's my main message? And what are the stories that will support that and take the audience on that journey?
Thank you, Bill. And Henry's book, the title of Henry's book is Persuade with a Story.
That's it.
And then he also is the co-author of Defining You, How Smart Professionals Craft the Answers to Who Are You, What Do You Do, and How Can You Help Me? And it has a special emphasis on defining story, defining paragraph, defining statement. And so I appreciate that. Bill, thank you so much first for being with us today. Thank you for being my friend. And thank you for the good work that you are called and compelled to do. It matters, and we are better for having you with us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate that.
And that's a wrap.